Part of our early response measures included encouraging all members of parliament and members of staff to undergo testing, and that a voluntary testing exercise for members and staff was carried out between the 2nd and 4th of April 2020 here within the precincts of Parliament. In this regard, I wish to confirm that for all the individuals who tested, including all members of Parliament from both houses and members of staff, there were, quite thankfully, I must say, no confirmed COVID-19 cases, as was formally communicated to me by the firm that carried out the exercise, Lancet Kenya Medical Laboratories. However, honourable members, let me sound a word of caution. We should not relent, and we must continue to uphold the sanitation measures, including wearing of face masks at all times, hand washing or use of hand sanitizers, and observing strict social distancing, amongst other measures. In this regard, honourable members, the Parliamentary Service Commission is in the process of organizing another testing exercise. This exercise, which will be voluntary, as the first one, is targeted at all members of Parliament that have not volunteered so far, and staff, and further of contracted cleaning companies working in Parliament will also be required to be tested. This is necessary, honourable members, because the contracted companies keep changing the staff, and would want those that come to work within Parliament to be those that have undergone the testing. Honourable members, I encourage all of you and all members of staff to take advantage of the opportunity to take the test that the Parliamentary Service Commission and the Ministry of Health are providing free of charge. The dates when the exercise will be undertaken will be communicated as soon as practicable. The House is accordingly guided. I thank you. Yes, Mr. President.
Speaker, now you have made a very important communication rather, on the members and staff who went through the voluntary testing. And the Ministry of Health and the company that did the test have confirmed that all members of staff and members of Parliament from both houses who underwent, none of them tested positive. I hope for fairness, the media should correct that position, because it has affected those of us who were tested, who were negative, and it made us even sometimes to post the results to clean our name. So I think now the media is under obligation that going forward, and I think this letter should be given to them so that the rest of us who have not gone the voluntary testing, they can have the courage to go and do it, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Now, Honorable Mishra, this is not business, but maybe because
Thank you, Speaker Sir. Speaker Sir, practice of medicine has to be followed with a lot of ethics and moral. Today, this global crisis, unfortunately, has united the world to fight two battles battle with the virus and battle with the economy. But having said that, my honest request to this august House through you, Speaker Sir, to the government of Kenya, we have to be very, very careful about these people who are making rumors, because these rumors through social media or any platform of media to that matter is concerned, we have to take it seriously. That will misguide the noble work our ministry and government is doing tirelessly, and that will end us with a lot of troubles. So, our Speaker, sir, please, we have to take it seriously. Those people are doing rumors. Medicine is our health, health is life. Thank you, sir.
You say people are doing what? Rumors.
Rumors.
Oh,
sorry.
I thought you meant.
Rumors. Sorry for my wrong accent.
I thought you are addressing the issue of masks.
No. I will.
Well, I think the best we can do, of course, is to make that kind of clarification, so that unless people are otherwise motivated, they have no reason to continue peddling rumors. Yes, but Honorable Mbandi, you also wanted to.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes I assume things which media comes up with, because sometimes media, they want to sell their papers, they want to sell stories. That's why I didn't bother, Mr. Speaker, when I was leading the list of the purported members who are tested and found positive. Mr. Speaker, and actually I was tested. The reason why I didn't want to come out was to reduce the stigmatization of this disease, because if I came out to explain that I'm negative, which of course I was giving credence to that narrative that was being peddled in the newspaper, that if you are found positive, then something is wrong. We need to understand that this disease, it is possible to contract it, but you need to be careful. It is infectious, and those who contract it are not criminals. But, Mr. Speaker, the reason why I rose to speak is that I think now, especially one media house, The Star, if it still wants to maintain or retain some credence, they should now go out and say that the narrative that they brought out of 17 members testing positive was fake news. Sometimes it is just decent and common. It makes sense, Mr. Speaker, to accept where you went wrong. That was alarmist, and to me, they sold panic. They were selling panic to the people of Kenya. It was completely unnecessary, and I want to encourage those who have not been tested to go get tested. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you should have even allowed us to take another test, those of us who took tests, because 4th of April is a while ago. I would want to do this test, if possible, if we had the capacity. We would even do it weekly, so that, because you can contract this disease anytime, Mr. Speaker. So I just wanted to say that the media needs to correct that narrative, because it was selling panic, it was discouraging Kenyans from taking the test, which should be the standard. It's only that as a country we are lacking the capacity to do mass testing. Everybody in this country should go for this test. That is the only way we can know that we are safe as a country.
I see there is also the Honorable Otiende Molo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will not take time on this because I fully support the intervention by the Leader of Majority. I only want to suggest how it should be done. Mr. Speaker, to allege in the headlines, and it was not only the Star, I think it was the Standard also, even mentioning numbers, and then in the social media you put names, it is grossly irresponsible. And under the Defamation Act, the proper thing to do is to issue a correction and apology. That correction should be done in both papers, and it should also be done by way of a letter to you, which then you can read to the members. Mr. Speaker, this is important because I've noticed we are all frustrated. Kenyans and the world are frustrated. And people necessarily want to vent their anger on someone or something. Most Kenyans are directed at this house. This is the house that has been called the house of traitors, without evidence. This is the house that has been alleged to fail to pass laws, and there's no law that has been presented to us which we failed to pass. So I think, Mr. Speaker,
and this is our 35th brief. Fellow Kenyans, coronavirus has continued to cause distraction. With approximate
Next on
hizi wanaume na wake ni hivi sambamba, mkipiga hatua na sisi tupiga hatua. Kuna mizigo yenu yafanana, kwani mtu kama ali pamoja?
Hata mimi simjui bwana. Mimi nimetoka kufanya shopping ya mtoto wangu amezaliwa jana.
Hata mimi basi nitoka kufanya shopping ya mtoto wangu pia wa kiume kama ulivyokuwa naomba tu kabisa. Hata na mtoto wangu kwanza, alafu tandamana tukamwone mtoto wangu.
Wacha tuone wangu kwanza kisha tukamwone wako.
Mimi shafika tayari.
Hata mimi shafika na ngoja mtoto aamshwe.
Next on
Never give up. Jesus loves you. Never give up. Gentle judges just
A-P-P-Y-H A-P-P-Y-H A-P-P-Y happy happy.
everybody move to the Next on
The huge German dog is the proud foster mother of 4 fox cubs. Dunker might not have had puppies of her own, but is an experienced foster mother. As panda reserves are stepping up efforts to get pandas out of their cages and back into the wild. Flying Dragon, otherwise known as Long Tongue, is about to take its first tentative steps into the great outdoors. Each day, the children are forced to guard their lunchboxes as dozens of hungry monkeys search the school grounds for food.
Next on.
Vile nilienda clinic nikiwa na mimba 8 months. Nimeenda wakanipima, wakaniambia pressure imepanda sana na ni lazima tuokoe mmoja kati yenu.
Nilienda huko nikaadmitiwa. Wakafanyia mtoto test zote. Wananiambia they are negative. Haoni chochote. But mtoto ana converse. Dispass kumpea hizo dawa zote. Mpaka daktari alisema aipewe dawa nyingine. Ni amepewa zimetosha.
Yaani disability yangu nilipata nikiwa mdogo kabisa, kama sijielewi. Yaani tuseme nilijipata nikiwa naye. Lakini mzazi aliniambia ilikuwa polio.
'Cause we're differently abled.
This weekend on KBC Channel 1.
I'd be very careful the way you address me, given that I literally have your life in my palm.
People lose hands and palms every day.
Be careful you don't get yourself in that list.
People, why can't you give Solomon a chance to speak out? You talk like angry monkeys. And you, when are you ever going to learn to listen?
Okay. If you know you took my juice, it is not that expensive. It is only 10 bob.
Why is this Angela face laughing?
Don't mind her, tell us the good news, Murume, You know some of us need something to cheer us up.
Classmates, every Saturday on KBC.
Up country, do we quarantine you? Yesterday I was being told of a case of people from Ukambani who suddenly appeared in Mfangano Island. They've been quarantined. So how do we deal with such cases? I don't know how they reach, but they have reached. By now I'm yet to get the full information, but we must know how to deal with that. But finally, Mr. Speaker, again, people talked about, Honorable Jared has said how everybody must be tested. Let it be voluntary so that every member goes, but we encourage every member, including myself, because I didn't do the first round. And the reason I didn't do the first round is I was on my way when I saw in the Star that every member of parliament is positive. Who am I, Milio Diambo, to come here to be infected? I went back to my house. So let us stop doing things which even creates fear even amongst us. We are members of parliament, but we are human beings. I'm not coming here to be a hero. When you will be eulogizing me that she was a good person and others will be cheering when I'm dead, Mr. Speaker will be dead. Nobody will resurrect me. I will take care of myself so that I am alive. Finally, Mr. Speaker, as a Christian and as a leader, we are called on at this time to stand in the gap for members of Kenya and the world. And with your permission, I'm whispering a prayer that in the name of Jesus, we stand in the gap for this country, and we pray that things will change, and this coronavirus will be history, and we pray for recovery for those who are sick. In Jesus' name I pray. Thank you.
Now, honour members, we are likely to now go into another 1 minute. Member for Migori.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to Hon Millie's prayer, I say a big amen. Mr. Speaker, just on the note that we are just concluding, I wanted just to hear a proper clarification. Members of this House have got responsibility to their constituents. And these media reports, the way it came out, it made it look like the disease is only carried by members of parliament. Now, with the restrictions of movement, some of the reports and interventions that members may want to do are on the ground. I wanted just a clarification. How do members access their constituencies? Because just relying on some information that we get. Some are very alarming, some are serious. Like in my county, as I stand here in Nyatike, in Kabuto Nyora, people are moving out of their homes because of the water. And it is not clear to us really where are they exactly and how are the conditions there. So, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to add my voice to the fact that the media need to treat the members of this House with some decorum and give them hope and bridge the gap between us and our constituents. And at the same point, I wanted to know, like, now that we are here in Nairobi, how free are we to go back and forth to try and also assess the situations on the ground for ourselves and also whatever interventions that we may recommend. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, but members of parliament have not been stopped from doing their duties. If you are doing your legislative work here, representation requires that you must visit every part of the jurisdiction that you represent. So all you have to do is social distancing. That's all you must remember. Even as you do that job, because we are into these times, just remember social distancing. Otherwise, the rest of the job of a member of parliament, we must continue doing. We have a duty to the country. It's a constitutional duty. Please, let's move to the next order. Honourable members, you may recall that early today, the House rejected a motion under order number 10 of the order paper for the morning sitting of today. The motion, which was moved by the Departmental Committee on Education and Research, was asking the House to reject the appointment of Mr. Mbage Juguna Nganga and Ms. Leila Abdi Ali as members of the Teacher Service Commission. Honourable members, the question now before the Speaker is, what is the implication of the House rejecting the special motion, which is couched in the negative? Certainly, it cannot be that the House has approved the nominees, because a decision of the House to that effect ought to be unequivocal. On the same vein, it certainly cannot be that the House has rejected the appointment of the same nominees. This is not the first time that the House is confronted with a scenario of the nature presented by the first-stated question. In answering the question, I am therefore informed by my predecessor in the 10th Parliament, whereupon a motion asking the House to reject proposed appointment of one Mr. Mumo Matemu as the chairperson of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, EACC, was rejected by the House. At that time, in 2011, my predecessor, the Honorable Ken Marende, did observe that in such circumstances, the nominees stand, implying that the nominees still remained before the House, considering that the nominee had neither been approved by the House nor rejected. The then Speaker did add that it was incumbent on the mover of the business in question, or any other member of the House, to determine whether or not to move a positive motion for the approval of the nominees by the House. Honourable members, I hasten to state that I'm not about to deviate from that precedent set by my predecessor. In fact, I agree with him that an approval of the appointment, as contemplated by the Constitution and statutes, is an affirmative and unequivocal approval by the House and cannot be deduced from the rejection of a committee report. In such circumstances, the onus is on the relevant committee or any other member of this House to give notice of a motion to that effect, phrased in positive terms. Honourable members, I wish to inform the House that I've already received and approved a notice of motion from the leader of the majority party, the Honourable Eden Duale, asking the House to approve the appointment of Mr. Mbage Nganga, Jogona Nganga, and Ms. Leila Abdi Ali as members of the Teacher Service Commission. Should that motion be carried, then the decision of the House will be construed unequivocally. Similarly, should the positive motion be negatived by the House, the decision of the House will have been made again unequivocally. I therefore guide the House accordingly. Next one.
Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers.
Any paper? Is there any paper? Is there any paper?
This one also. You are saying you want to issue this one later on, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we are going to papers.
Oh, leader majority, you have papers to lay. Honorable, who?
Speaker, I have no papers to lay.
Honorable, is it Katole Metito? You have a paper? None. This is a report on mediation. Was it late in the morning? Oh. Oh, yeah, okay. I think the table office did not get it correct. That's the next order. Notice of motion.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
Yes, leader majority has notices.
Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion that pursuant to the provisions of Article 113(2) of the Constitution and Standing Order 150, this House adopts the report of the Mediation Committee on the County Government Amendment Bill number 2, Senate Bill number 7 of 2017, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020, and approves the mediation version of the County Government Amendment number 2, Senate Bill number 7. Second, Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion that pursuant to the provisions of Article 113, subsection 2 of the Constitution and Standing Order 150, this House adopts the report of the Mediation Committee on the County Government Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 11 of 2017, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020, and approves the mediated version of the County Government Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 11 of 2017. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I have another motion, notice of motion to give with your permission. Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion that taking into consideration the resolution of the House made during the morning sitting of Wednesday, 22nd, 2020, rejecting a special motion proposing the rejection of the nominee for appointment to the Teacher Service Commission, and taking cognizance of the provisions of Article 250, subsection 2B, and Article 259, Section 11 of the Constitution, and pursuant to the provision of Section 8 of the Teacher Service Commission Act 2012, this House now approves the appointment of the following persons as members of the Teacher Service Commission. Number 1, Mr. Mbage Njuguna Nganga, and number 2, Mrs. Leila Abdi Ali.
Next order.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
Member for Uridi, what's your point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just on a small clarification on the papers that the majority leader has tabled, including the notice of submitting a secondary motion based on your guidance. Mr. Speaker, we are operating under difficult circumstances, and even access to this House is based on an SMS platform on a first-come, first-served basis. And in other forums, Mr. Speaker, members of Parliament, including those who would want to partake, would want to be in the House to debate on this important matter, might not get opportunity to come because we only have a limited number of members who can be able to access the chamber. Would you give guidance that probably a motion of that magnitude be deferred up to until such a time that members can be here so that a proper debate around that matter can happen? Because otherwise then a decision might be taken and members might not feel fully satisfied because admissibility into this House is based on a first-come, first-served basis. And every member has a right to be here and to do this. In the alternative, Mr. Speaker, that the House might consider setting up mechanisms of members to do voting even online when they are not within the House on a serious issue like this one. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
With the last point which you just raised, I want to tell you an outright no. Because I have seen you members complaining that even when you are told to register, that you say, no, I registered and I have not been put there. How about if you are to vote? We have taken comparisons with all other jurisdictions. Debating, we can do virtually. And I just gave an example of the House of Commons. It's a House of 654 members. Only 50 are sitting in the chamber physically, and 120 are participating in debates. That's just one example. In all other jurisdictions, the issue of voting can never be, we can't even agree on simple things about SMS. I mean, you can imagine voting. Here, members make statements and they immediately deny until we have to go and check on the answer. So you are in the habit of saying and denying, saying and denying. And I'm not saying you, Honorable Nyamita, it's not you. I'm not saying not you in person. So because we have that experience, that we have that kind of difficulty as Kenyans, not actually members of Parliament, as Kenyans, we are in the process of exploring other ways to see how best we can deal with the issue. If indeed a matter is that is one that the House thinks that everybody should express themselves, although of course you know it has never happened. It hasn't happened. Members will always, even when we require 2/3, we hardly ever get it. And if we have given members more than 2 weeks to go and prepare that on this day they will be, you're required to come here in your droves. We still don't make the 2/3. So the only way to perhaps address that issue is every member desiring to participate to indicate. And currently the only method we have, and indeed I want to really discourage members from also making remarks that also discourage the staff, because the staff are asking me, what other method can we use to know that the member for this and this intends to be in the House? And just to give an example right now, members indicated that they will be participating this afternoon. I think we still have about 6 or 5 seats unoccupied. Almost 45 minutes since the House sat. I'm just saying, more or less, I'm not able to, you see, some of those corners are a bit dark. So, surely, we can only use that method where please indicate, and the staff will always, every Friday, be indicating that since we already passed a motion that we'll be sitting on Wednesdays every week, morning and afternoon. So by Friday, 1 p.m., the notice will go on so that you register. But also, we will try to look for a way of creating some balance so that if you've been in the chamber too often, and the others also who have indicated their desire to come, only that they are a bit slow in logging in, we allow them also on occasions to come and participate, if they desire so to do. Otherwise, we have no way. Honorable Nyamita, I hear you, but we've taken all these people who are coming up with all manner of solutions. None can address that issue of voting. They have not been able to. And you see, we need to know. We don't want somebody to say, no, I knew that the Honorable Nyamita was not in his house at that time to vote. So you see, we really must look for something that also allows Parliament to operate as Parliament. So for the time being, honorable members, let's just try to grapple with this and make adjustments where necessary. And I'm always available for improvements. The staff are more than willing to get. In fact, there is something which has been referred to the Committee on ICT through the Honorable Soti and other members of that committee to try and look at some of the proposals which have been developed and suggestions and advise not just the Commission, but even the House. We may need to have some robust debate and agree, because some of those things could be very tricky. Some will tell you Zoom, others Skype, all those things are all prone to abuse. All of them, especially with regard to the work that Parliament does, where we require things to be done positively. But with specifically to the matter that has been raised by the leader of the majority party, he has just given notice. That business will be put in the order paper on Wednesday. So it will be on the order paper on Wednesday. So please, on Friday at 1 p.m. when the staff indicate to members to log in to indicate desire to attend, please, at that time, since in any event you are doing social distancing, you are unlikely to be distracted by anybody near you. So I'm assuming that we can be able to, for the time being, I just want to plead with us that let's just carry on with what we have. Next.
Recognizes that there are positive aspects, perhaps a silver lining in everything, including moments of uncertainty, anxiety, and despair. When our nation was ravaged by the HIV/AIDS pandemic, we saw firsthand what the power of love can do to our society. Grandparents from every corner of Kenya came forth to raise children orphaned by the pandemic. And we saw such pulling together during the 2011 drought, the Westgate attack, and the 2015 massacring of our students in Garissa. In the short period since we discovered the first COVID case, and more so since we started internalizing the implications of it, I have seen your gradual but steady coalescing on an emotional and spiritual level. People have set up informal groups that are cooking for or distributing food hampers to the needy. Organizations and companies are joining hands with the government through various contributions. The religious community has continued to provide spiritual nourishment within the stipulated guidelines, and for the most part, you, Kenyans, have joined the government in the fight against coronavirus. And I thank you. The fight might be housed in the Ministry of Health, but it is one that belongs to each one of us. In Kenya, in the East African region, in Africa as a continent, and indeed the globe. Fellow Kenyans, a few days ago, the World Health Organization warned that despite the seemingly slow pace of infections in Africa, the number of coronavirus cases could surge from just thousands to 10 million within 3 to 6 months. While this is a projection, it might as well be the reality in the coming days. Consider that this past week alone, we have seen significant changes of infections in our own neighborhood, where the COVID-19 cases in Somalia have multiplied 9-fold in a single week, from 26 cases on April 13th to 237 by yesterday. In our neighboring Tanzania, the numbers have swollen 7-fold, from 32 cases to 254 within the same period. These developments concern us. They might translate into frightening reality for the Horn of Africa. While what we are learning is that this virus transmits silently. Initially, it may move at a slow pace, but as we have also seen in countries such as Spain and Italy, it takes on such frantic speed that even the most developed of nations cannot catch up with it. Between March 18th and 25th, a span of 1 week, the cases in Spain grew 5-fold, from 11,741 to 50,019. Given these realities, the general sentiment of comfort we are witnessing is severely misplaced. When we as a nation are complacent with a few officials exploiting this pandemic for personal gain, or conversely, the idea that we can break curfews and not suffer any ramifications, then we know that we are heading in the wrong direction. And indeed, there is nothing to celebrate when runaway impunity takes place at the risk of all of us. As a government, our planning and actions are informed by global trends and our own analysis. A slight lapse in behavior, like the ones we have witnessed in the last few days, could roll back the gains we have made so far, and by implication, the destiny of our nation. The days when everything was left to the government are long gone. This disease is now calling for our total and divided commitment and unity. While I appreciate and acknowledge the cooperation by many, many Kenyans, I must say that there are a few Kenyans who deliberately rebuke the efforts that we have put in place to contain the spread of the virus. Our daily update briefings have served to rally Kenyans to their individual responsibilities, while at the same time painting the picture of our situation. And this is not just in Kenya, it is a global practice today. It is therefore unfortunate that some naysayers have dismissed our data briefings as mere daily ledgers. Elsewhere, the disease has thrived on similar cloud of silence and ignorance, and which we are being pushed to adopt. We reach back, and we will continue to inform Kenyans of our situation and measures they need to continuously take in order to flatten our curve. Regarding mass testing, the exercise is ongoing, targeting high-risk areas, which include healthcare workers. Every country is working on testing targets, or have fallen short of these targets because of global disruption of supplies. Our plan is to conduct 250,000 tests by the end of June. However, this 250,000 will not match our population. Hence, we are collaborating with our development partners to ramp up our surveillance testing mechanisms. The plan entails community-based surveillance, hospital-based surveillance, and population-based surveillance. For the community-based surveillance, we are working at about 100,000 households. For the hospital-based surveillance, we have mapped out 20 hospitals in 16 regions. All this is being done under an overarching 5-year public health security framework that we have worked out. Our coronavirus response is therefore nested on this policy. The challenge we have over and above corona is to keep an eye on the other healthcare challenges. I therefore want to call on all counties to ensure continuity of health services without losing sight of the corona epidemic. We should therefore be prepared in the coming days to share our county health service delivery scorecards. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Kenyans, in times such as this, we have to be alive to the effect that COVID-19 management measures, what these measures have had on our people. We are particularly concerned about mental health. Towards this end, we have established a psychiatric and psychological care help framework over this period. If you feel distressed and needing counseling or psychological care, please call 1199 and you will be attended to. For any inquiries on continuity of psychological care or psychiatric emergencies or crisis, please call our hotline, which will be distributed to the media. Today, we have looked at the unfolding situation in Mandera County. So far, the county has 8 cases, 2 cases of urban refugees. Now, this is a dangerous situation because, as you are well aware, Mandera has a lot of is a corner county with neighbors on 2 sides, and is also affected by travel from other parts of the country. Therefore, as part of the containment measures, the government has today directed restriction of movement into and out of Mandera County. The county, therefore, becomes the 5th county where movement has been restricted. Today, Having tested 707 samples, we have 7 persons who have tested positive to the disease. Those being Kenyans as a whole. We don't have any foreigners in those figures. And I would like to state, kama vile nilisema, hii ugonjwa si ugonjwa wa serikali, hii ni ugonjwa wa kila mtu. Na kama mjuavyo, kuna wale ambao hawaogopi, na yule ambao haogopi atakuja kuogopa, kwa sababu hii ugonjwa haina tajiri, haishagui tajiri, haishagui kijana, haishagui yoyote. Kila mtu anaweza kushikwa na hii ugonjwa. Kwa hivyo sisi tunasema wale ambao wanasaidia sisi sana ni wale ambao wanafuata sheria ile tumetoa, mipango ile tumetoa. Hao ndio wanasaidia sisi kama Wakenya. Lakini mjue ya kwamba wale ambao hawafuati, wale ambao mnaona wakiruka wakitoka kwa quarantine facilities, hao watu ni kusema wanataka kutoka huko waingie vijijini wapeleke ugonjwa huko vijijini. Ukiona mtu akiruka ni vile mnajua wale wengine walifanya. Mnajua kuna watu walienda mazishi upande wa Malindi kule Kilifi, ugonjwa ukaanza. Wengine wakaenda mikutano, ugonjwa ukaanza. Hapa Isili tulikuwa na imam, alikuwa hajui yeye ni mgonjwa, akaja akafariki. Wale ambao walikuwa na yeye karibu wamepata hii ugonjwa. Kawangware iko watu wengi, walianza na mtu moja, wakaenda 3, wakaenda wengine 2, na tunaendelea kufanya testing huko tuone ni wangapi pengine. Ukiangalia kule Mombasa upande wa KPA vile hii ugonjwa inaendelea kuchika watu. Kwa hivyo jameni, mimi ningewasihi wa Kenya tusije tukasikiliza wale ambao ni lazima waseme mambo mambaya, mambo maovu kwa wale ambao wanafanya hii kazi, kwa mimi mwenyewe, kwa wale wengine. Msije mkasikiza hao watu. Mimi ningewasihi tuendelee kusikia vile serikali inasema, kwa sababu hii kazi ya kupigana na hii virusi si kazi yetu kama serikali. Hii ni kazi ya kila Mkenya. Na wewe ukijisikia, ukiona kama sio wewe, ukiona kama hii si kazi yako, basi wewe umeanza kukosea. Wakati unasikia wewe hiyo sio kazi yako, umeanza kukosea, kwa sababu hii ni kazi yako. Kwa sababu gani? Kwa sababu hii ni ugonjwa wetu. Kwa sababu gani? Kwa sababu hii ugonjwa inaweza shika wewe, na ikishika wewe, basi wewe utaleta hiyo ugonjwa kwangu na kwa yule mwingine. Asanteni sana.
Yesterday at KMTC, or is it on Monday? Just how many people escaped from the quarantine facility? How long had they been there? Were they those that were recently arrested, or those that just came in? Where were the officers who were manning the facility? And then to the DG, there is a drug that has been used across the world to treat especially severe cases of COVID-19, hydroxychloroquine, and research has also shown that...
I don't think we had a question. The one for the DG?
Yes, I was just getting started. To the DG, there's a drug that is being used across the world to treat severe cases of COVID-19, hydroxychloroquine, and research has shown that it has some adverse effects, especially on people who have heart problems. Probably here in the country, is there a drug regimen that is being used especially for those who have severe cases of COVID, having other illnesses that they are suffering from?
Nancy Okware from KBC. My question is on the number of people who have succumbed to COVID-19. They are 14. And do we have any foreign nationals among those 14? And if yes, how is the government handling the bodies, given that they should be disposed of as soon as possible?
I think for me, I am going to respond to the issue of KMTC briefly. I think most of those questions were technical questions that Dr. Amoth can answer. On KMTC, and by the way, it is not just KMTC. Let me explain. It is not just in KMTC that people have escaped from quarantine. In fact, Mandera was the first place where people escaped from quarantine. And I would like to agree that it is not possible for people to simply walk out of an institution that has got security forces, that has got people charged with the responsibility of ensuring that people stay within the quarantine facilities. But more importantly, it is very difficult to fathom how an individual who knows very well they are not in prison. Quarantine facilities are not prison facilities. You have been kept there, or you have been quarantined so that you can protect yourself and you can protect those people around you. So those of you out there, those Kenyans who know of an individual who was in quarantine, and you know them, who was in quarantine, who is now proposing that you should be living normally with them. An individual who you are aware, because there were even videos, who you are aware jumped the fence at KMTC, jumped the wall at KMTC, and is now with you. That individual is going to cost you very, very highly. That individual could end up killing your child. It is therefore imperative and important that you call the police and let them know that individual XYZ was in quarantine and is now hiding in house number 10 or house number 12 at Umoja or Buruburu or wherever else. So mine is to urge people that, and this is why we have been talking about this being our own responsibility. It is not for the police to go searching for this person, which they will, and which they are. They have probably been arrested already. I don't know as I speak. But that's not the point. The point is that you cannot have 47 million policemen following 47 million Kenyans. People need to police themselves in a matter such as this one. Therefore, I would urge that those people surrender themselves back to the quarantine facility, because if they do not surrender themselves back, then they render themselves to all kinds of things, including being mobbed by people, and taken there by force. And therefore they should not expose themselves to that kind of possibility. I think it is enlightened self-interest for them to report back to the quarantine facility. But in addition to those ones, are also those ones who, as you have been seeing in the social media, entertain themselves in places that they are not supposed to. And the irony of it is that within a couple of days of that entertainment, you hear of a positive case. Therefore, let me just again appeal to Kenyans and to inform you as follows. We can defeat this disease. We do not have to multiply 4 or 5 times like the neighborhood and the world is doing. If we exercise self-discipline, if you become your brother's keeper, and I become my brother's keeper, and by that I mean both positively and negatively, where we help each other, where we assist each other, where we try and provide for each other. But the flip side of it is that where we also report each other when people do not do what they are supposed to do. So once again, we urge caution, we preach hope, but we also preach responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Chemutai asked about the use of hydrochloroquine and its safety profile. Remember, hydrochloroquine and chloroquine are closely related compounds and had been used before, and they are even continue to be used, for example, for rheumatoid arthritis and other immunological conditions which require control. Our case management team have developed proper guidelines on the use of chloroquine, taking into consideration existing medical conditions. So we shall be able to adequately titrate the dose of chloroquine. Indeed, if you have a heart problem, in which case chloroquine could interfere with your cardiac rhythm and cause problems. And as doctors, we know how to do that, and we do it very well. But I also want to highlight that it's not only chloroquine that is being in use. Over and over again, we have reported other compounds that have been used world over, some with very good results. However, one of the limiting factors has been the limited number of cases studied. For example, there's a new drug called remdesivir that has been used in the United States with very, very good effects, but on a small select population of people. And there are many other compounds, Avigan, Caletra, interferon, and all drugs, including Panadol, has adverse effects and must be used within a proper dosing regimen. And this will apply for treatment of COVID if we adapt use of chloroquine and hydrochloroquine as one of the molecules in treatment of severe COVID disease. In terms of internment of bodies of foreign nationals, I'm pleased to inform you that foreign nationals have done very well. We have had a Congolese couple who were discharged the other day. There's a gentleman from Comoros who has been discharged from the treatment center, another one from Cameroon, and another one from Pakistan. So they have done well, but we also have standard guidelines that we have adapted from the World Health Organization and customized to our local needs for internment of bodies. So far, it's only one foreign national who passed on at Kenyatta National Hospital, and in liaison with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we quickly reached out to the embassy, and we got a letter of authority from the relatives of this individual, and the individual was buried in a cemetery, I think in Nairobi. So foreign nationals is only one who has passed on. Very many of them have done very well. They have been discharged, awaiting just clearance of travel clearance to be able to go back to their respective countries. Thank you.
Inform the county level champions and to take the action. This information initiates the response team to visit the suspects, and they assess whether the person meets the epidemiological or clinical definition. Mainly, they're looking at the fever of 38 and above, or history of fever or acute respiratory infection, that is a cough, shortness of breath, or sore throat. Mr. Speaker, if the person meets the case definition, the patient is automatically evacuated to the isolation facility for laboratory testing, observation, and treatment. Those that do not meet the criteria but are probable cases, swab is taken, and the patient is put under close monitoring by the county or sub-county rapid response team and is also advised on self-quarantine until the results are out when decision to isolate him or her is made. The transfer of confirmed or suspected case is done by well-equipped ambulance system with all the necessary personal protective equipment. After this, proper disinfection is undertaken on the vehicle. On the risk allowance that was being undertaken, as a point of clarification, Mr. Speaker, no amount of compensation can pay for the risk that our frontline workers, doctors and nurses, are putting their lives to every single day to ensure that we defeat the pandemic. This is largely a professional calling and commitment undertaken by our staff as part of the professional sacrifice. However, the government have reviewed the special circumstances that come up and have come up with a draft comprehensive proposal which includes strategies to address the motivation and welfare of the health workers who are in an increased risk of infection and psychological effects, including the dual burden of caring for their families while offering service in context. The incentives under proposal include provision of comprehensive medical care for our health workers, disability and life insurance, risk allowance and tax relief, as well as facilitation of meals and accommodation as part of the duty stations of officers working in isolation and critical care facilities serving COVID-19 patients. These proposals, Mr. Speaker, were developed in collaboration with the Ministry of Public Service and Gender and under consideration. Other measures include provision of dedicated transportation facilities to healthcare workers in COVID-19 management, establishment of dedicated COVID-19 isolation and quarantine centers, ensuring containment as well as continuity of routine healthcare services in other centers. In addition, the Ministry will evaluate the inclusion of all allowances that are payable to health workers across all counties and ensure that they are well compensated to meet the current and future challenges as per the advisory from Salary and Remuneration Commission. Mr. Speaker, as highlighted above, the Ministry of Health has designated facilities for isolation and treatment of health workers who may be infected. And this center is at Kenyatta National Hospital and is supported also by Rockefeller Foundation. We as a committee has also requested the Budget Committee to give us, on the supplementary budget too, to provide for money to finish that facility where all our healthcare workers will be taken care of in case they confirm for positive for COVID-19. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. At Kenyatta National, it's a daycare center which is going to be turned to be the center that will take care of all the health workers who turn positive.
Well,
I've said. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll also table guidelines of use of masks because we had that discussion today in the morning. I'll also table the same, and I request all honorable members to go through it. Mr. Speaker, again, I want just to request that the proper use of mask must cover from nose all down to the chin. And for members who have the mask that have a metal or hard thing here on the top, press it so that it covers your nose. And this will make sure that your mask don't keep on coming down. Mr. Speaker, that is just for the members, and the guidelines are here so that they know the proper use of mask. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Where's the Honorable Caleb Amisi? You are candidate for punishment for coming into the chamber 1 hour and 11 minutes after the commencement. That should tell you I was keeping note of the time that I noticed the Honorable Junet was walking in. The Honorable David Ochieng.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I rise on Standing Order number 1 and Article 21 of the Constitution. And this is based on an answer that was given this morning by the chairperson of the Committee of Health, Mr. Speaker. And it relates, Mr. Speaker, to the implementation of the rights of persons in the country. If you allow me, I had thought about doing a statement, but I came in late because the statement came in just towards the afternoon, so I wasn't able to get to your office on time, Mr. Speaker. If you'd allow me, Mr. Speaker, in the morning, it came out that the ministry said that the guidelines for handling dead bodies were not followed in the case of Ugenya. But this is not just about Ugenya, Mr. Speaker. It's about the general issue about ensuring that the rights of Kenyan citizens are upheld and respected during the period of fighting the COVID-19 disease, Mr. Speaker. That's why I rise. If you allow me, Mr. Speaker, I may proceed to request that through your guidance, as the Committee on Administration sits, would they, Mr. Speaker, be able to check on the possible violations of human rights during this period, especially how we treat patients or suspected patients, how we treat those we are quarantining, how we treat the families of these people, Mr. Speaker, how the police behave when they are arresting. Mr. Speaker, you've seen on TV where the police are arresting, they are not masked, they are putting 10 people into a single van, there are no tools to protect them, Mr. Speaker. These are issues I wanted to raise so that we ensure that, Mr. Speaker, under Article 21 of the Constitution, the rights, for example, under Article 28, dignity, arbitrary security, movement, and culture are respected, even, Mr. Speaker, we've not suspended the Constitution.
Honorable Chieng, you say, how do I allow you to seek a statement which I have not even approved?
Mr. Speaker, I'm guided, but just I wanted to raise those issues based on an answer that was given in the morning, Mr. Speaker, and I could not meet the timelines for your approval. I actually submitted a statement already, but it got to your place late, Mr. Speaker.
No, it hasn't even reached. Because I can assure you, anything coming from any member is given priority. I will not leave the office when there's something pending that a member has raised, unless it is something that requires a considered ruling. But this is a statement, and I'm the one who has actually said that a statement can be raised on Wednesdays. So unfortunately, it hasn't come.
Mr. Speaker, I'm guided, but this is a very urgent matter, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if there's a way in which you could, so that when you come next to Mr. Speaker, there's a way in which this Parliament is responding to the issues as they occur every day, Mr. Speaker. This is really the big problem that I'm having.
But now we cannot bend the rules. The Honorable Ole Metito? No. Yeah, there was a question there's a statement by, Honorable Mwashako.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask to request for statement regarding the cash transfer in Inua Jamii program to older persons. Honorable Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order number 44-2C, I wish to request for a statement from the chairperson of the Departmental Committee on Labour and Social Welfare regarding the cash transfer in Inua Jamii program to the older persons and other vulnerable groups, especially during this period of COVID-19 pandemic. Honorable Speaker, our government has an obligation to take care of the older citizens of this country. The Ministry of Labour and Social Protection has been running the Older Persons Cash Transfer Program, targeting the elderly persons and other vulnerable groups. Kenya shillings 8.7 billion has just been released towards these groups. Honorable Speaker, I wish to bring this to your attention that we have a big population of elderly persons who are not yet registered, and yet they are above 70 years old. Honorable Speaker, I wish also to bring to your attention that the government, to your attention that there are some of these older citizens who registered in 2017 and were receiving these funds, but until 2019 that they were informed that their names were missing in the payment system due to reasons such as incorrect ID numbers, details not captured correctly, inability to access money from banks due to fingerprints either changing or not matching. Honorable Speaker, it's against this backdrop and on account of these concerns that I seek a statement from the chairperson of the Departmental Committee of Labour and Social Welfare on the following. 1, what measures are being put in place to have all the vulnerable persons, and most particularly the elderly persons above 70 years, included in the Inua Jamii program? How many of these older persons are not registered in the program? And when is this registration expected to start? 2, what mechanisms are being employed in cash transfer program
to make sure there is minimal contact and congregation at pay points, particularly to restore the dignity of our older citizens and avoid exposing them to COVID-19, among other communicable diseases. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, how many of the senior citizens used to receive the benefits but have thereafter omitted and others denied for various reasons, and what caused these unfortunate occurrences? Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Which committee?
Labor and Social Welfare.
Chaired by the Honorable Ali Wario. Your request will be forwarded to the third committee through the Leader of Majority's office. Honorable Metito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, because of time and aware of the business ahead, order number 8, 9, and 10, I will try to be brief. And I will just say, Mr. Speaker, I'm rising to issue a statement to the House on the welfare of Kenyans abroad, faced with various challenges due to the lockdown around the world occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that today in the morning sitting, the leader of minority, the Honorable John Badi, raised this issue, but it's also good to note that on the committee own's motion, we met the PS for Foreign Affairs last week on Thursday, so we were actually ready to brief the House or appraise the House on what is happening. And first of all, let me thank your office and the office of the clerk for really facilitating that meeting in a very short notice. And it was actually carried live by Citizen TV. And I also want to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for availing themselves within a very short notice of 1 day. And Mr. Speaker, this is just a follow-up to another meeting we held with the MFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on 27th of January, still on the same matter, and I issued the statement to the House on 3rd March. So last week, Mr. Speaker, the issues the committee wanted to know were as follows. One is whether all monies earmarked for the upkeep of Kenyans in China had been disbursed in full to them. And this was for students, not every Kenyan in China. Students who were there, actually they were 91, and 9 acrobats. The second issue we wanted to know as a committee was whether the country had explored the possibility of facilitating exit of Kenyans from the affected regions now that the situation seems to have stabilized. That was in China. And third one was the report of the mistreatment of Kenyans and other foreigners of African descent in China. And the fourth one was the status of other Kenyans in foreign countries other than China, including the infections, the treatment, the general welfare, and the recorded death of Kenyan citizens, and any other matter that the ministry may deem relevant for the committee to know. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the government of Kenya had actually channeled about those 9,766,572 Kenya shillings to the Kenyan embassy in Beijing. And so far it had disbursed 4.956645 and a balance of 4,809,927 is in the process of being disbursed. The eligible Kenyans were, as I said, 91 students and 9 acrobats who were documented with the embassy. Each one of them was receiving 15,000 per badge, and actually it was done in 3 badges. So by the end of the day, or by the end of the disbursement, each of those 99 Kenyans should have received, actually students. So each one of the 91 should have received 45,000 Kenya shillings. And this is on top of their usual scholarship stipends. This money were also supplemented by by some food donation from the Chinese embassy here in Nairobi and also the Kenyan mission in Beijing. On the second issue of lockdown, Mr. Speaker, Wuhan City, where the virus actually was first or originated for that matter, there was a lockdown which was lifted on 8th of April 2020, that's this month, and the situation still remains fluid and unpredictable, and therefore the students are still locked down with their respective universities, but they are all in good health. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it's good to note that there were some reported cases actually of 2 students, Kenyan students, elsewhere in China, but they had received treatment and they are all okay. The ministry reported that no student had requested to return to Kenya. The third one is that the embassy had requested the Chinese authorities to allow the remaining unregistered Kenyans, there are about 3,000, some of whom have expired visas, to regularize their documentation after the pandemic. And I can confirm that one has been agreed, so no harassing of Kenyans because of some invalid documents. It was agreed between the two governments, Kenya and China, that is through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that these Kenyans whose maybe passport or visas have expired will have their documentation regularized after this pandemic. And there are about 40 Kenyans who had expressed willingness to return against, but you see what is happening, Mr. Speaker, is that the government is ready to facilitate those Kenyans who want to come back, just the way it was done by other nationals who are here in Kenya. Actually, what they have done is that they facilitated their nationals to go back. Facilitation is different from evacuation, because evacuation, it is the government that pays the cost of everybody or everything. But facilitation, it is at the cost of the individual. And that was how it has been done by other foreign countries who facilitated their nationals to go back. But in the case of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, the Kenyans in Guangzhou, specifically Guangzhou in China, you know, because of the lockdown, the ministry or the government wanted to use, the Kenyan government wanted to use a Dreamliner for that facilitation. And you know, their carrying capacity is 211 passengers. But the Kenyans who had expressed willingness of actually coming back, there were about 40. That makes the flight largely commercially unviable for the flight operators. Mr. Speaker, the big problem is in India, and this is why I wanted members to listen very, very carefully. In India, Mr. Speaker, we are having about 750 Kenyans, and about 250 out of the 750 comprises of businessmen and people who have gone, Kenyans who have gone for business, and the patients, Kenyans who have gone to seek some medical treatment, and they're willing to return. In fact, they even have return tickets because they just went for a short visit, maybe after medication or after that business. Now they want to return. And the problem they're facing now is not of their own making. They even have return tickets to come back. But Mr. Speaker, the country is in a lockdown, just like any other place, Mr. Speaker. And you know, it is so fast, and most of them, and you know, our KQ flies to Bombay, but you see most of these Kenyans, they are in other very far states from where our national carrier flies to. But the ministry is very ready and is actually doing that facilitation to talk to the authorities in India to allow for their movements from this state to the other. They're even ready to fly to New Delhi, where most of them will come, and then they will see whether they can pick them. They actually said by end of next week, they will have been through with that facilitation. Lastly, is I just want to say that generally there are approximately 3 million Kenyans abroad, and the situation worldwide is dire, and due to huge infection rates in Asia, USA, and Europe, facilitation to exit these countries to Kenya would complicate a lot of effort within our borders, since they would also require collecting them from various scattered cities all over the world that are already under lockdown. But Mr. Speaker, it's also just good to say that, because I will statement, in terms of death, how many Kenyans have died abroad over this, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that we have 5 deaths of Kenyans in the USA and 2 others in other states, although actually in the US, one of them is a staff of the mission, but they have not really, been very clear whether they are related to, the death is related to COVID-19. But overall, there are 7 Kenyans who have been reported dead at the time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, because of the time, I just want to say that to table the report, the statement, but it's also good to note that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the supplementary budget have even lost a lot of money, which is where we are going now, and they need about 4.5 billion to handle these facilitation efforts in fine. I'm saying, like, even in terms of exchequer, they haven't even received their 4th quarter. So they're having a lot of problems there. But when we go to the next order on supplementary, we will be able to discuss that. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to table the statement.
Honourable members, I think let the statement be tabled. No, I'm not going to allow debate. I'm not going to allow debate. Take the statement, go through it. I want you to, as you go through what is in that statement, do what you have to say when we get to this motion. Because a lot of these things are related to this motion, which almost every day you don't want to reach. But fortunately, for the information of members, today you are free to leave this place as late as 9. But please, but please exercise social distancing. And because all of you have got police bodyguards and you have your parliamentary vehicle stickers, tonight, and all these days when we are here, you can drive yourself, and even the staff of Parliament are at liberty to also join us, leaving this place at 9. If you wish, you can extend the sitting up to that time, because a lot of these things that you want us to discuss without necessarily getting into some resolution, they will be best addressed when you get to this motion, so that we have a resolution. Because I've been following most of the comments. That's why you hear me regularly talking about the Honorable Millie Odhiambo. And right now she is not in her shift. She will begin making those contributions. And you have, Honorable members, it's only that the country doesn't know. You have made such great contributions, and I think if only you could allow to get to this motion so that the country can know actually you have done a lot of work. I've been following. Honorable Pasari, I know. Honorable Otiende Amolo is a member. Honorable Makali Mulu is. Of course, the admin, Honorable Gunjiri, Honorable Ishungwa occasionally, Honorable Kimunya, Honorable Didi Mazimbarasa. I think that is one of the says occasionally, but the Honorable Caleb Amisi and Honorable Didi Mazimbarasa stand out with those others I've mentioned. I think they don't sleep, those ones. And the Honorable Flores Mutua. Yeah? And the Honorable Beatrice Nkatha. The Honorable Halima Musheke. Honorable Kaluma is obviously indefatigable, as you know. He's so I know many of you, in fact, almost all of you, each of you has made some contributions to that. And I think until we get into this motion, the country may not know what it is that you guys have been working on. And you've done a great job. So I think, honourable members, let the Honourable Kato table his statement. It can be photocopied and circulated so that when we get, because we have a lot of business to transact. So, honourable members, on occasion I have to weigh between the need for you to speak and the need for you to transact the rest of the business. For now, let's go to the next business.
Order number 8, motion. Senate amendments to the Division of Revenue Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2020.
Chairman, Budget and Appropriations Committee.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And I beg to move that the Senate amendments to the Division of Revenue Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2020 be now considered. Honorable Speaker, you remember we passed this Division of Revenue Bill just before we went for the short recess earlier in the year. And Honorable Speaker, it was relayed to the other house in Senate, and they did amend what we had done, Honorable Speaker. And largely, Honorable Speaker, having considered the amendments done by the Senate, we have resolved to concur with them. Honorable Speaker, the main point of departure between our proposals and those of the Senate is on how to treat the shareable revenue that was to go to Nairobi County and the 4 functions that had been transferred back to the national government. In consideration of the Division of Revenue Bill 2020, Honorable Speaker, the Senate was in concurrence with the National Assembly. With respect to the amounts of shareable revenue, Honorable Speaker, you remember there was concurrence even under IBEC and even with CRA on the 316.5 billion shillings that would be shareable revenue between the 2 levels of government. However, Honorable Speaker, the Senate proposed amendments to delete subclauses 2 and 3 under clause 4. Specifically, Honorable Speaker, the Senate removes the original provision made by the National Assembly, making provision for setting...
Honorable Ishongwa, my attention has been drawn to the fact that you have no mask.
Honorable Speaker, I had a mask, and when everybody moved away from me, I considered that I was all alone in this region since the leader of majority. But I'm at liberty, Honorable Speaker, to put it back. Of course, Honorable Speaker, having gone to Alliance, I have a 3M mask that is an N95 mask. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, I can see the leader of minority complaining, Honorable Speaker, but he is complaining that Parliament has facilitated him with the medical, what are they called, the surgical masks that are 3-ply, but they're equally good. But the N95 with a cartridge is much better than what you're wearing, Honorable Leader. Anyway, Honorable Speaker, back to business. I was saying the Senate removed the original provision that the National Assembly made that was making provision for setting aside the equitable share amount that was due to the Nairobi City County, which we had said shall be retained in the consolidated fund to meet part of the cost of functions transferred to the national government. Honorable Speaker, this was in line with the provisions of Article 187 of the Constitution, Honorable Speaker, which specifically, Honorable Speaker, 187.2 states that if a function or power is transferred from a government to at one level to a government at the other level, arrangements shall be put in place to ensure that the resources necessary for the performance of the function or exercise of the power are transferred. Constitutional responsibility, Honorable Speaker, for the performance of the function or exercise of power shall remain with the government to which it is assigned by the fourth schedule. And Honorable Speaker, you'll appreciate that the functions that are being transferred in the fourth schedule are largely assigned to the county governments, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, there is also appreciation that there was a deed of an agreement that was signed between the county government of Nairobi and the national government, Honorable Speaker, and there is a particular clause in the deed that was signed, Honorable Speaker, that specifically stated explicitly that money for these functions would come from the county revenue fund, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, finding ourselves between rock and a hard place, Honorable Speaker, we have recommended, Honorable Speaker, that the following, Honorable Speaker. One, the Honorable Speaker, we say the major point of departure between the national government and the Senate was how to effect the transfer of resources needed to fully fund the transferred functions from Nairobi City County to the national government. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, what we are recommending is, Honorable Speaker, if there is a way administratively or legally to ensure that all resources needed for the transferred functions from Nairobi City County to the national government to be made available to the national government to be able to perform this task, Honorable Speaker, to avoid a protracted mediation process that may flow well into the better part of the year. You remember last year, but one, Honorable Speaker, we had a mediated version of the Division of Revenue Bill, and it took us, I think, all the way up to close to November to even agree on the final figures of the shareable revenue, Honorable Speaker. Therefore, the National Assembly, Honorable Speaker, wanted the requisite resources needed to fund the transferred functions to be explicitly retained in the consolidated fund to satisfy the provisions of Article 187. The Senate alternatively wants the funds to be transferred to the Nairobi County as usual, but does not address the sticky issue of how the resources will be transferred from the Nairobi County government's county revenue fund to the national government. It is in view of this, Honorable Speaker, that the committee say that the required funds transfer arrangements can expeditiously be sought administratively or legally to ensure that all resources needed for the transferred functions from the Nairobi City County to the national government are indeed available. Therefore, the committee recommends that this House does concur with the proposed amendments by the Senate and therefore accepts deletion of the schedule as well as accepting the substitution thereof. Then, therefore, the new schedule as proposed. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move, but also, Honorable Speaker, to note that at the time the National Assembly was initiating and approving the Division of Revenue Bill for 2020-21, Honorable Speaker, even the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, it's called what? NMS, had not been established, and therefore, even in our engagements as a committee with the National Treasury and other stakeholders, it was still not clear at that time how the transferred functions would be catered for, and therefore we had acted based on what is provided for by the Constitution under Article 187. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, as I said, in the best interest of the county governments to ensure that, one, the people of Nairobi, especially at this time, and you remember some of those functions relate to healthcare, relate to water provision, relate to infrastructure development, Honorable Speaker, to ensure that there is seamless flow of resources back to the national government. I want to encourage, Honorable Speaker, both the national government and the Nairobi County government to engage meaningfully and get an administrative or a legal way within which they may be able to transfer resources, Honorable Speaker. Because it's just a question of sitting down and agreeing on what needs to be done, what amount of resources ought to go to come back to the national government, Honorable Speaker, and allow the people of the great city of Nairobi, Honorable Speaker, to benefit from resources this year. Finally, Honorable Speaker, we must appreciate that at the time we did this Division of Revenue Bill, Honorable Speaker, COVID, or the coronavirus, the first case of COVID had not been reported in this country, Honorable Speaker. We are dealing now with very extraordinary times. And maybe, Honorable Speaker, were it possible at this time, I would even have pleaded that we further amend this schedule to reduce the shareable revenue that is going to the county government, Honorable Speaker. But again, in the interest of avoiding protracted battles with the Senate, Honorable Speaker, but I would want to appeal to all our county governments, Honorable Speaker. I have seen very few of them initiating supplementary appropriation bills on what the revenues they have been given for 1920, Honorable Speaker, to ensure that more resources are going towards water for cleaning our hands, Honorable Speaker, towards provision of PPEs for healthcare workers in the counties, and therefore, Honorable Speaker, dedicating more resources to healthcare and departments like water. And I want to encourage county governments to look not just at this financial year's budget also, only, Mr. Speaker, but also to reconsider the budget that they had proposed for the next financial year, Mr. Speaker, and institute austerity measures, Honorable Speaker, that will bring savings, because the impact on our revenues will not just be at the national level, but also at the county level. With that, Honorable Speaker, I beg to move and request the Leader of Minority, Honorable John Buddy, to second.
Honorable John Buddy.
Mr. Speaker, as I support, I just want to make this matter clear. First, it should be understood, Mr. Speaker, that we only disagree with the Senate when there is a reason to disagree. And it should come out clearly that this House is not at war with the other House. When Senate comes up with a matter that makes sense or is reasonable, we consider. But, Mr. Speaker, for members to understand what exactly happened, I want to remind members that after some functions, actually the key functions of the county government of Nairobi were transferred to national government, the costs for those functions were calculated, and the Treasury made a proposal that the amounts relating to those functions should be retained at the national government level as national government revenue to be given to this committee that has been formed, the Nairobi Metropolitan, to spend on these functions. And, Mr. Speaker, it's made a lot of sense, and this House did pass that. But, Mr. Speaker, the Senate has brought an amendment. And the reasoning by the Senate is that, yes, that amount earmarked for those functions shall be spent on those functions by this body that has been created. However, the amounts must first go to the county revenue fund. Then is when the money comes to this particular body. Mr. Speaker, there is where the problem is. But, Mr. Speaker, the reasoning of the Senate is backed by law to some extent, and to a great extent. Number one, if you read Article 219 of the Constitution, it is clear that a county's share of revenue raised by the national government shall be transferred to the county without undue delay and without deduction. However, one may reason that that only relates to amounts that has explicitly been appropriated to the county. That if the division of revenue is amended by a parliament and the amount is taken off the county, then you cannot apply that article. And I agree with that. And there I disagree with the Senate's position. But what is supporting the Senate's position are two things. Number one, Mr. Speaker, I think in preparing the deed, the transfer of functions from the county to the national government organ, Mr. Speaker, those who prepared the deed gave the responsibility of funding these functions again to the county government. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, when it reached that, and we looked at it as budget committee, we were, let me say, between a rock and a hard place. But, Mr. Speaker, even the Constitution, to a large extent, and there is where I want to stop, also makes a provision that if you read it clearly and keenly, it gives the responsibility, Mr. Speaker, and I want to read Article 187, 2B. Okay, 2A says that the arrangement shall be put in place to ensure that the resources necessary for the performance of the function or exercise of the power are transferred. But B says that the constitutional responsibility for the performance of the function or exercise of that power shall remain with the government to which it is assigned by the 4th schedule. Mr. Speaker, these functions which are being transferred from Nairobi County to the national government are listed in the 4th schedule as functions of the county. Therefore, the provision of this article gives the responsibility of ensuring that these functions are performed to the county. And so, Mr. Speaker, one would interpret that to mean that the resources, it is the county to make sure that resources are available. However, Mr. Speaker, there is a problem still. And this is a problem that the Senate must deal with. It's a problem that the executive must deal with. In fact, the deed should have been more clear. If you allow the county to be deciding on how this committee, the Nairobi Metropolis, is going to be funded, Mr. Speaker, let us not run away from it. It's a problem. And with the governor called Mike Mbuvi Sonko. And is the one who is going to be responsible in providing money to this organ. This is something, even if we pass it as it is, as the Senate is suggesting, Mr. Speaker, still a discussion on how the smooth funding of these functions need to be done. That I fault the executive. They were not diligent in preparing the transfer deed. And therefore, they brought the problem to this House. Let the executive team which prepared the deed look at it and correct this mess. Because otherwise, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have functions transferred to a body headed by a competent Kenyan called Mr. Badi, yet he may not have resources. Look at what has just happened the other day. The governor is refusing to assent to an appropriation bill, a supplementary budget, to get this body money to perform its function. So, Mr. Speaker, even as I second, but I foresee still there is a problem which the executive must fix. And the president has the powers even to reject what we have suggested to help him. You know, this constitution is very nice. It gives the president the powers even to return the division of revenue, actually to legislate with a veto. And for us to get 2/3 to overrule him and the Senate, Mr. Speaker, it may not be easy. So it's a tip to the executive on what they can do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second.
Now, the Honorable Emilio Diambo, your time hasn't come. I know that the time is coming when we get to the next order. And I'm happy that today you are not going to complain that you are in Korogosha. Last week I saw your post that you are seated somewhere, which you described as, is this Korogosha? Ghetto, yes. But, honourable members, that was the latter, just to acknowledge that I follow what is said. I propose the question that the Senate amendments to the Division of Revenue Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2020, be now considered. Leader Majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this Senate amendment which is before us, and I'm wondering, Honorable Bandi, for the first time, and he has gone on record, when the president returns a memo, he used to say the president is legislating. But now he is confirming that on this matter, the president must legislate. And I think that is the only route out. Mr. Speaker, I slept over this matter. Number one, there are fundamental issues in this division of revenue bill this year. Even the 316 billion given to the counties itself is unrealistic, and I said it. In fact, the Senate should have given the counties the 15% allowed in the Constitution. That's about 270 billion. So this 316 billion given to them, where they're going to get it from, where the National Treasury will get it from, is something I don't understand. And the moment we pass it, it becomes law. Article 219 comes into effect. You can reduce the budget of the national government, of the judiciary, and the legislature, and commissions and independent offices, but you will never touch what you allocate to counties within the reading of Article 219. Now, the Budget and Appropriation Committee are very honest. The people who failed, and that's why the Senate used, is the people who prepared the deed of transfer. And if you read at the deed of transfer 5.2, but I look at the report of the Senate, 5.2 is very specific that the money will go to the county revenue account. So as we pass this, the president has, or the national government has two options. One is to review the deed of plan, which they can do. They can call the county government.
I think you did say the deed plan.
I did say the deed plan. I said the deed of transfer. Yeah, I said the deed of transfer. They need.
Is a member of Kikuyu is trying to impute that you said deed plan?
You know, because he's thinking about land throughout. As he sits here, his spirit is in the land ministry and the land commission. Where I come from, there's plenty of land. You know, you can't even give me half an acre. So the president and the team, the national treasury, the county government can review the transfer, the deed of transfer, and rectify that 5.2, section 5.2. The other option is the president to exercise Article 115. Because I think the thing now has become very murky. Functions or resources follow functions. So if you transfer functions, you must also transfer resources to the person who is going to do those functions. That is the pure reading of the Constitution and the PFM Act. And I think just because we look at it, but most of us, myself, Honorable Junet, we wanted to reject this and we go to mediation. But we realize that, sometimes if the Senate found something in law, we have no reason to fight them. So we have no choice. Mr. Speaker, I think we just support the committee's recommendation. And then the national executive, the county of Nairobi, the Senate, ourselves, we can sit again and see how we can deal with this matter. But the bottom line is transfer of functions, resources must follow. And we must make sure those resources are available. I support Mr. Speaker.
Member for Arienda.
I do not wish to speak on this, Mr. Speaker, because I agree with those who have spoken.
Gosh, and you are right on top. I'm sure you may have wanted to contribute to something else. Yes. Member for Nambale. Honorable Sakwa Bunyasi. John. Yes.
I support the proposal as it stands. I think it is time that we tested how the systems should work. When laws are made, they're not made with the persons who will hold the office in mind, but it is a system that needs to work. I think it's time that the governor for Nairobi, I'm even surprised that he's still governor, the governor for Nairobi learns to operate in accordance not only with the law, but what is in the public interest. So I support the position of the Senate. If there are going to be any subsequent issues, I'm sure that apart from the proposals that have been made by the speakers about the options that the executive has got, there are also other options that were not exercised in terms of deciding whether or not the governor should continue to exercise executive powers on this. I think it is a matter the National Assembly should let go and let the Senate follow through, and maybe there may be options not only around executive but also around the right and the powers of the governor of Nairobi and how he exercises those functions. I support.
Honorable Mutua Barasa.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I rise to support, but I just also want to add my voice on what the leader of minority said here, that yes, indeed, we agree that money must follow functions, but the role of members of the county assemblies into allocating that money cannot be washed away, Honorable Speaker. We can give it a blind eye in this pandemic of COVID-19, but going forward into the future, that the Assembly must discharge their role of appropriating those finances. It is after they have approved the budget of the Nairobi City County, that's when those amount of money will now be taken to where those functions are, Honorable Speaker. But let us say and done, Honorable Speaker, I support and that looking at the mood of the House, you can put the question.
Honorable Didmas Baraza, it is against our rules to contribute and then ask that the question be put. Honorable Makali Mulu. Give him.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I also rise to support this Senate amendment. And I think my colleagues, the move and the second and Honorable Duale, have already done a good job in terms of what the law requires. And this is what I want to say, Honorable Speaker. Division of Revenue Bill discusses the issue of vertical allocation of resources. And in this case, Honorable Speaker, we are not having issues in terms of what the national government gets and what the county governments get. The issue is at our level where we are saying, how much does this particular county get in terms of allocation? And that's what we call the horizontal allocation of resources. And that is a matter of CARA, Honorable Speaker. So when you look at the Constitution, Honorable Speaker, the Senate is actually been set up to take care of the interests of the counties. And this being a matter at the county level, I think as a House, it is important we approve what the Senate has proposed so that those other administrative issues could be discussed. And also at the same time, Honorable Speaker, if you look at what we went through last year through the mediation, the 2019-2020 Division of Revenue, I think that's something we should avoid as a House. So even as I support, I say, Honorable Speaker, let's support the Senate on this matter, and those other issues can be followed up. I submit, Honorable Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Tigania West.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also rise to support the adoption of the report. Senate has looked at this report, Honorable Speaker, and I'm a member of the Budget and Appropriation Committee. And in our opinion, we were grappling with the issues of how the resources are going to be utilized, whether the work plans and budgets of the county, the Nairobi County especially, is going to be adopted and is going to be followed. And the role of the County Assembly in the management and the oversight role of the County Assembly of Nairobi, now that there is a shift in terms of the governance of the Nairobi County. Honorable Speaker, I support.
Honorable Malo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I rise to support this amendment by the Senate, I want to emphasize something, Mr. Speaker, that Governor Songo will remain the governor of Nairobi, whether we like it or not, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the governor, he has executive powers. He was actually voted by the people of Nairobi. We have come up with a new amorphous body, the Nairobi Metropolitan, Mr. Speaker, which we do not even understand its framework of operation. It becomes very dangerous, Mr. Speaker, just to transfer the funds without a proper framework. As we support the Senate, Mr. Speaker, and as outlined under Article 219, which Honorable Badi mentioned, if the money has already gone to the counties, we should not interfere. It should go to the county fund. Then from there, Mr. Speaker, let them have a memoranda in terms of administrative functions so that it can be transferred to Nairobi Metropolitan, Mr. Speaker. This is for purposes of accountability, and I'm here, Mr. Speaker, to support the Senate. And as it goes back, let the Senate look at that agreement between the national government, Mr. Speaker, and the county. We've been told, Mr. Speaker, last time, public participation was done after We know very well, Mr. Speaker, public participation must be done on a matter when it is pre. But in this case, it was done post. Mr. Speaker, let's not set a wrong precedence. I've seen in the social media, Mr. Speaker, seeing Governor Songo lamenting. He signed under duress, Mr. Speaker. He did have time to read. We're asking where were his lawyers, Mr. Speaker. Maybe it's the highest time we should revisit the matter, re-examine it, and be able to correct where things went wrong. I support Mr. Speaker.
It looks like is everybody supporting or what?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to oppose the amendment by the Senate. Mr. Speaker, first let us interrogate the matter wholesomely. It is for a fact that the Constitution provides avenue for transfer of functions from one government to another government. That was done constitutionally, Speaker. So, it is for a fact that certain functions of Nairobi County government were transferred to the national government. And Mr. Speaker, the logical thing that follows is that resources must follow functions. For example, Mr. Speaker, we have functions of legislation here, oversight. If today we have those functions and the resources are to be domiciled in the executive, how are we going to operate? Sure. And the functions are given to us. And they were transferred not under duress. It was broad daylight. All of us were watching it on TV. Nobody was coerced. And attorneys were there. Everybody was there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when, according to my understanding, the 5.2 under the transfer of functions, the deed for the transfer, when they talk about county revenue, I think they were talking about symbolically that the monies that belong to the county still can be exercised and given to the national government functions that have been transferred. Because, Mr. Speaker, even if you look at this Division of Revenue Bill, it has conditional grants from the national government, even though they are provided for in the Division of Revenue, but those are still monies that are coming from the national government that is going to specific functions in the counties. So, Mr. Speaker, let us not split hair. The governor agreed on his own terms to transfer certain functions, and he said he doesn't have the capacity, he doesn't have the manpower to do it. He himself, when he was talking, is on record. So, Mr. Speaker, you can't have your cake and at the same time eat it. If you agreed willingly to transfer your functions, you cannot again say, I want to have the money so that I can do the work. So you must decide either way. You either remain with the functions and keep the money, or the way you have agreed to transfer the functions, leave the money to someone else who is ready to perform the function. Let us not politicize this matter. I totally disagree with the Senate. And this is just normal, usual shenanigans from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. They keep on saying they're protecting the counties, and our counties are not functioning. You know, this Senate now is there for it has been there for the last 7 years. There is no single governor, Mr. Speaker, they have indicted, either for corruption or for misuse of funds, and their public accounts committee sits every day. You will see them on TV grilling a governor. In the end, nothing comes out of it, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the protection of the devolution does not mean that you have to close your eyes on what's happening in the counties. We also come from counties. There are a lot of problems in the counties. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I oppose, and the bill must remain as it were, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Mandera.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the very onset, I want to say that I rise to oppose this bill, Mr. Speaker. Under Article 95 of the Constitution, the National Assembly exists to resolve issues concerning the people. And as an interested person coming from Nairobi City, the Senate has presented to us a dilemma in which we either agree with them, or if we don't, then we are considered to be the ones who have created the problem. This problem did not emanate from the National Assembly. There are more issues than this, and I've always made it very clear my position on Article 115 of the Constitution. To pass on this problem to the executive to resolve by way of presidential reference back to the House is to abdicate our responsibility as a House. Number two, Mr. Speaker, there are more issues relating to this, and I agree with the members who have contributed to the question that public participation itself, for example, having been done after the fact. There are deeper issues. If you look at Article 187 of the Constitution, read together with the Intergovernmental Relations Act, there is a question of who is the county government as an entity executing that deed vis-a-vis the executive, which is the government. The county governor, who is Mike Mbuvi Sonko, cannot purport to have been the person constituting the county government, which is clearly defined under Article 260, to the total exclusion of the Speaker, the County Assembly, and all the other entities. The governor created this problem. He can now not hold back to the monies, and this assembly must do only one thing: disagree with them and let the other parts take its natural course. I disagree.
Member for Limuru. What has happened?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I rise to oppose this Division of Revenue bill that has come from Senate. And I have a very simple reason. I know that the law might be speaking to what the Senate has done, but we are boxing ourselves in the fact that the moment that we release this money, under Article 219, we have no say on it. So what we are saying is that we are either trashing the Nairobi Metropolitan Services Department, which was created by the executive, and therefore telling them that they are going to be answerable to the governor of Nairobi and the MCAs, or because we are the ones who are appropriating, make sure that we don't create other crises upon the crisis we have of COVID-19. Nairobi is our capital city. And Honorable Speaker, already we have issues with dealing with cases in Nairobi on COVID. And I'm sure the Nairobi Metropolitan Services Department has a role to play in trying to ameliorate the issues of COVID-19. And if this money, 16 billion, Honorable Speaker, or so, that is supposed to be taken to the Nairobi Metropolitan Services from the county is not given, then what it means is that we have crippled that the Nairobi Metropolitan Services. Honorable Speaker, as I end up, I was listening to a debate, and this is open, and everybody around who cares to listen has heard, that the governor of Nairobi is currently attempting to initiate a reversal of the deed of transfer that was done. Now, if that is done, it means this money will go to the county government, and he will do whatever else he wants to do with it. He may not have to necessarily appropriate. After all, he refused to sign a supplementary appropriation bill to go just because he felt he has the powers. So, Honorable Speaker, let us not create a crisis in the country when already we are fighting with crisis COVID-19 and many other issues that arise out of it. I stand to oppose.
Just to say, let me get another Nairobi member, the Honorable Pasaris. Oh, there's another one. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
He's putting on some red mask. So, given the color of the seats, he looks like the seats. Honorable Kakuya. Yeah, that must be. Very well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to oppose. As a Nairobi leader, and I'm sure many of the other leaders elected in Nairobi will agree with me, we have had total confusion in the way this city is managed. And as we've all agreed, this is the capital city. When the governor went and signed an agreement with the executive to transfer functions, it was because he had reached a point where he accepted that he is not able to run and manage Nairobi County affairs properly. the county was bleeding and really requiring leadership. Now, the fact that he transferred the various functions, and now we have the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, who the Nairobi leadership actually met with Major General Badi to discuss how can we move ahead, how can we help you, so that we can, all of us together as elected leaders of Nairobi, work towards ensuring that the services are there. You cannot transfer functions. You cannot transfer functions and expect that those functions will be done without money. The money is absolutely necessary so that the county can actually be able to do not only its standard functions, but even right now when Nairobi is an epicenter, we can see the governors that don't have issues like we do in Nairobi, like governor in Mombasa, Joho, what he's able to do. Right now, Nairobi is at a standstill. We're not seeing leadership, and what we're seeing is a tug of war. I believe that when the governor was transferring these functions, he had reached the point where he realized that he needed help. And what better place to go than to the executive? And the executive was saying, okay, fine, we can do this, we can take over these functions. And he remains the governor, but the functions have been transferred. Now Nairobi is held ransom. And to be quite honest, the office is bigger than the individual. The individual cannot hold this country ransom. He may be elected by the majority. The people who elected him saw him. They witnessed the governor handing over the functions to the executive. Many countries in the world, the executive runs the major cities, like Paris, for instance. All right? So I feel that right now you have an office with the Major General Badi, and you have the county assembly. The county assembly were not even looked in when the governor went to transfer these services. Okay, these various functions to the Nairobi Metropolitan and to the executive. So right now, I believe that what the Senate is trying to do is wrong. We should allow what has already happened to take shape so that Nairobi can actually start seeing some leadership. Us as Nairobi members of parliament, we feel that we've been actually left out in the running of Nairobi, and you cannot, as a member of parliament, answer questions to your various constituents when you're asked, why is this not happening? Why is this not happening? You have no answers. We need to ensure that we have sanity in the leadership of Nairobi, and for that I oppose the Senate Amendment Bill, because Nairobi Metropolitan Services is what should now be having the money to perform the functions that the governor himself gave to the executive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Makuya. Very soon, honourable members, I will be calling upon you to make a decision on this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I rise to oppose this particular bill. Mr. Speaker, taking into consideration that, in fact, we have witnessed the kind of drama of leadership within our county government of Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, what I want to state here is that, in fact, the governor of Nairobi was not pointed on a gunpoint when he signed this deed, and I believe that he did it willingly. And, Mr. Speaker, it is very true that, in fact, there was enough time for the governor to converge his team and take possession. And I believe that, in fact, when he took that position, he was driven by the will of the majority of his management. Mr. Speaker, as we stand, it will be very unfortunate to start thinking that, in fact, we can still disperse money back, the money that is entitled for the transferred factions, and then we disperse this money direct to the county. I'm finding it difficulties on how the same governor will be willing to transfer this money to the needs of NMS. And in this particular case, if we cannot make a decision towards how these monies are going to be directed, Mr. Speaker, we cannot leave this just to the scope without making sure that, in fact, this particular house takes a position and making sure that the chainage of this money is protected. We do not want to have drama of this money thereafter after disbursement. So, Mr. Speaker, to me, for the purpose of the discharge of services in Nairobi, Mr. Speaker, I believe the right direction is to make sure that these monies are, a formula is looked into, how this money can go directly to NMS without necessarily seeing the light of the day to the accounts of the County of Nairobi. And in this particular case, Mr. Speaker, I believe that's the only the Nairobians can see the services they require or they need from this particular county. When the Sonko decided to surrender these services, it is true that, Mr. Speaker, he must have evaluated himself and found himself a failure to tackle the problems of Nairobi. And that's why he took a direction of handing over these particular functions. And at this particular time and moment, Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow the same governor to be a roadblock towards the same functions himself have surrendered. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I stand to oppose and ask the Parliament to take a stand on the way forward.
Member for Wajir North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also rise to oppose this motion. Oppose this amendment. Speaker, the fact is, whenever you transfer function, you must transfer resources commensurate to the functions you are transferring. Speaker, we are in a very difficult period. This is an extraordinary time and requires extraordinary actions from legislators. Speaker, when the function was transferred to national government, Metropolitan does not fall under the county assembly in terms of oversight role. It falls under the national government and it falls under our departmental committee. I wonder why this function should once the transfer of function has been done, I wonder why we should be discussing that resources should be taken to the county government. A county government that we are already cognizant of how it is doing in terms of performance. That notwithstanding, this deal has not been signed under duress. We were all watching. Mr. Speaker, it was done with a lot of celebrations from both parties, free negotiations made, and we cannot afford to hold any resources during this difficult period. Resources must be transferred to Nairobi Metropolitan so that they can execute their functions diligently to the satisfaction of the people of Nairobi County. All of us actually live in Nairobi County and we don't want to be in a state of mess. Mr. Speaker, we disagree strongly with the Senate and we agree to the fact that this money must be channeled to Nairobi Metropolitan. With or without mediation, the money should be passed to Nairobi Metropolitan so that they can execute their functions diligently to the satisfactions of Kenyans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, honourable members, I think I see Honourable Barida, you have put in a request there also.
No, Mr. Speaker. I want
About
to
something else?
To the next one.
Honourable Lesonet. Honourable Lesonet, I can see you are next there.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as Budget and Appropriations Committee, we have duly gone through the sentiments by the members. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to inform members as I support this motion, the motion of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, that this is the Division of Revenue Bill. This is the bill, Mr. Speaker, that shares monies between the two levels of government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at this stage of this bill, we don't even know how much money is for the Nairobi County government. Because this is the Division of Revenue Bill, sharing monies between the two levels of government, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, once this bill, the Division of Revenue Bill, has been assented to, it will now come up with a county allocation of revenue bill, which will determine how much money, Mr. Speaker, is going to the Nairobi County government, and from which, Mr. Speaker, the County Assembly of Nairobi will therefore determine how much resources is going to the functions which have been transferred back, Mr. Speaker, to the Nairobi Metropolitan Services. Mr. Speaker, it is not our mandate. And when you read, Mr. Speaker, the section 182.2 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, B, of which it says, constitutional responsibility for the performance of the function or exercise of the power shall remain with the government to which it is assigned by that fourth schedule, Mr. Speaker. That tells you, Mr. Speaker, despite these functions having been transferred to that Nairobi Metropolitan Services, Mr. Speaker, NMS, it is still the responsibility of that county assembly, of Nairobi County government, for example, Mr. Speaker, to oversight the utilization of these funds. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to beseech members that please let us agree with the Senate so that we don't go through a very protracted process, Mr. Speaker, that may even take us to court, Mr. Speaker. And you never know, Mr. Speaker, when matters go to court, this NMS will remain dysfunctional, Mr. Speaker, as long as somebody is in court, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the position which I've seen members are agreeing with, of opposing, that is where we were as budget. That was our original position. We originated that, Mr. Speaker, at the beginning. We've gone through those motions, and as a committee, Mr. Speaker, we have found it fit that let us agree with the Senate that this money first goes to the Nairobi County Assembly, from which they will appropriate and decide how much is for the functions which have been transferred to NMS. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I support.
The Juakari operators and others, our saloonists, our mamboga, our barbers, our economy to a large extent depends on you. We cannot allow Kenyans to die because of non-distancing in any sector. So those of you who are carrying out the hair-cutting business in barbershops, in saloons, I am appealing to you today. Ensure that social distancing, fumigation of your working